is denying your child is because of his fiancée. Ever in a relationship with Ms. Davison that during the window of conception, she had multiple sexual partners trying to pin her baby on you because she knows you are a good man and is jealous.
I am 19 years old. He is 10 years older than me. I did not make this baby on my own. My grandmother should not have to pick up the slack and handle his side of the work.
While I'm here today, I know I'm not the father of her son, and I was not the only one out of 6, 7 friends and had her too, the same time I had her. On and off, on and off. I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to disrespect you like that, but you coming at me crazy and my fiance like that, so I'm gonna let you have it. Saying that she got a baby by me and all this and that.
Inside Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, the atmosphere is already tense long before any DNA envelope is opened. This is one of those emotionally charged paternity disputes where every person entering the courtroom carries their own version of truth, their own fears, and their own regrets. In this particular session, the court becomes a living example of how truth changes everything. A phrase often repeated on podcasts like the Game Changing Attorney podcast and Truth Changes Everything podcast. But here, truth isn't being discussed abstractly. It's about to determine a child's future, expose mistakes, correct false assumptions, and challenge the fragile relationship between law and justice. The courtroom is busy today. On one side stands a young mother, barely 19, who appears burdened by stress, exhaustion, and the responsibilities of raising a newborn with limited support. Alongside her is her grandmother, the quiet, stabilizing figure who has effectively stepped into the role of the co-parent. The young mother repeatedly emphasizes how she should not have to carry the weight of raising a child alone. Her statements echo the kind of emotional honesty often heard in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where people lay bare the struggles they are desperate to overcome. Across the aisle is the alleged father, a man about 10 years older than her, stiff in posture and resolute in his denial. He insists he is not the father. He believes the only reason he was pulled into this case is because he is, in his words, a good man, and therefore an easy target. Next to him sits his fiancée, a woman deeply protective of her partner and convinced that the young mother had multiple sexual partners during the conception window. Their side of the courtroom has its own narrative, one that paints the mother as dishonest, inconsistent, and manipulative. Judge Lauren Lake listens intently, as she always does, balancing empathy with firm direction. Her courtroom is one of the rare spaces where people are given the chance to confront their own decisions under the bright light of evidence. In this case, she is not just evaluating emotions. She is preparing to weigh DNA evidence, witness testimonies, contradictory timelines, and accusations that bounce from one side of the aisle to the other. Throughout the hearing, Judge Lake repeatedly reminds the parties that the courtroom is not the place for personal attacks, but a place where facts, not feelings, determine outcomes. This is where the concept of justice in jurisprudence becomes visible, not as a theoretical framework discussed in textbooks, but as a practical method for untangling guilt, shame, fear, and doubt. As the arguments develop, the court learns that the man and woman had a complicated relationship. The mother claims he lived with her and her grandmother for months, eating, sleeping, and spending time in their home, not just visiting. The alleged father, however, insists it was nothing more than casual encounters. To him, it was only about 3 times and never serious. The two versions of the relationship clash, creating courtroom tension that Judge Lake must constantly calm. Witnesses begin entering the court. First comes another man, the ex-boyfriend, whose presence immediately complicates the timeline. He explains that he was romantically involved with the young mother on and off, though he believes, or wants to believe, he was not intimate with her during the critical conception period. But his uncertainty stands out, creating doubt that the alleged father clings to as proof that the child isn't his. This type of uncertainty is a classic example of why adverse inference in Evidence Act arguments sometimes arise, when missing or unclear information creates room for suspicion. Judge Lake is careful not to rely on inference. She steers the conversation back to facts, dates, and specific claims. The grandmother sits quietly until Judge Lake asks her direct questions. Her explanation is simple. She allowed the young couple to spend time together at home because she preferred her granddaughter to be in a safe environment rather than out on the streets. This reasoning sounds almost like something out of the Divorce Course podcast, where guests often reveal the complicated realities of relationships that outsiders oversimplify. As testimony continues, the alleged father grows visibly agitated, especially when text messages are entered as evidence. These messages, romantic, affectionate, and inconsistent with his claim that the encounters were meaningless, create a shift in the courtroom tone. His fiancée becomes uncomfortable, and Judge Lake must remind him repeatedly to control his reactions. This is where the human side of courtroom truth-telling becomes most obvious. People often regret what they wrote in anger, in affection, or in manipulation, especially once it becomes part of a legal record. Throughout this section of the hearing, the courtroom becomes a stage for people confronting their own contradictions. The alleged father insists he said things just to talk and didn't mean the affectionate messages. His fiancée shakes her head in disapproval. The grandmother looks disappointed. The young mother looks vindicated. At this point, the courtroom feels almost like one of those DNA test cheating stories that surfaces online, except this is real life, real consequences. The truth changes everything. Theme is palpable in the air. The next layer added to the case is the presence of another potential father, whose testimony deepens the complexity. He openly admits that he and the young mother had been intimate, maybe once a week, though he cannot recall the exact months. His uncertainty introduces yet another crack in the timeline, reminding everyone how easily memory can distort facts when relationships are unstable. Judge Lake allows him to finish, but she recognizes that all these conflicting stories, while important, cannot override science. This is why DNA testing exists, to cut through doubt, noise, and emotions. More witnesses join. The alleged father's fiancée takes the stand to express her belief that the young mother had too many partners for paternity to be assigned confidently. Finally, the grandmother of the young mother speaks again, describing how she has taken responsibility not only for the baby, but for the emotional pressure placed on her granddaughter. Throughout these exchanges, Judge Lauren Lake becomes the stabilizing force. She represents the intersection of fairness, accountability, and mercy. Her courtroom is not just about confirming biological truth. It is also about giving families a chance to confront their past and reshape their future. The conversation shifts again when Judge Lake highlights how inappropriate it was for a grown man to engage intimately with a teenager. She calls out the imbalance, reminding him that maturity cannot be expected from someone still in adolescence. This moment is powerful and reflects how Judge Lake often emphasizes moral responsibility alongside legal evaluation. Then comes the emotional pivot in the hearing. The alleged father finally admits, indirectly, that he might have had doubts but continued engaging with the young mother anyway. He acknowledges his frustrations. He acknowledges that he reacted poorly. His fiancée becomes uneasy as more truth spills into the open. This part of the hearing feels reminiscent of adoption stories, full episodes where complicated family dynamics unravel during emotional revelations. Judge Lake, sensing that emotions are now overwhelming the parties, calls for order. She then requests the DNA results, the ultimate deciding factor. The courtroom becomes silent. Even viewers of Supreme Court child support cases would understand the gravity of this moment. Everything set up to this point, every accusation, every denial, every regret, hinges on the contents of one envelope. But before she reveals the results, Judge Lake reminds everyone of something profound. The courtroom is a place where truth is valued, but truth also brings accountability. People often regret taking a DNA test because it can destroy illusions, hopes, or lies that have supported their worldview. But those who regret it often forget that truth is still better than years of uncertainty. Judge Lake prepares to read the results, and the tension becomes nearly unbearable. As Judge Lauren Lake prepares to open the DNA results envelope, the courtroom settles into a strained silence. Everyone present understands that this moment is not just procedural, it is transformative. The entire hearing has revolved around conflicting memories, accusations, emotional reactions, and the fragile trust between the parties. This is where science steps onto the emotional battlefield. In moments like these, it becomes clear why so many people say that a DNA test people regret taking often reveals more than anyone expected. Before she even unfolds the paper, Judge Lake emphasizes the importance of accepting truth, even when that truth disrupts relationships or forces individuals to confront mistakes. She talks about how this courtroom is not meant to punish, but to illuminate. Her tone reflects the kind of wisdom often explored in legal storytelling platforms like the Game Changing Attorney podcast or the Divorce Course podcast, where the overarching lesson is that truth, law, and personal accountability must ultimately align. The young mother stands with her hands trembling, though she tries to hide it. She has spent months shouldering the full responsibility of caring for a newborn with only her grandmother's support. Whether the man across the aisle is confirmed as the father or not, she knows her life will remain difficult, but she desperately wants her child to have the stability she herself lacked. She repeatedly told the court she doesn't want her son to grow up without a father, because she understands the emotional impact that absence can cause. Her quiet resolve mirrors the emotional honesty often heard in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where people acknowledge the painful parts of their journey. The alleged father stands rigidly, still insisting that he knows he cannot be the father. Throughout the hearing, his position has been a mix of denial, resentment, and conflict. He entered the courtroom convinced the young mother was trying to trap him. His fiancée encouraged this belief and fueled his suspicions. To him, this case has been about self-defense, protecting himself from what he believes is a false accusation. His fiancée watches him now, trying to anticipate how he will react if the truth leans in a direction neither of them prepared for. Standing behind everyone, the bailiff holds the courtroom steady, waiting for Judge Lake's instructions. The presence of additional witnesses, including the ex-boyfriend, lingers heavily in the air. Earlier testimony about overlapping timelines and uncertain recollections demonstrated exactly why adverse inference in Evidence Act arguments often surface in family law disputes. When memory becomes fuzzy and emotions run high, people assume what benefits them most, twisting uncertainty into accusation. But a courtroom cannot operate on assumption. That is why paternity courts rely on DNA results rather than speculation. It is a perfect example of the relationship between law and justice. Law provides the structure, justice emerges when truth is applied fairly. Before opening the results, Judge Lake revisits the arguments presented. She reminds the parties that the mother provided a clear timeline, that she was consistently present during the conception window, and that the alleged father engaged intimately with her during those months. She also acknowledges that other men were introduced into the narrative by witnesses, but their testimony was inconsistent and lacked specific dates. Some of the contradictions in their stories resembled details found in DNA test cheating stories, where multiple assumptions create confusion until science cuts through the noise. The grandmother's testimony weighed heavily in Judge Lake's mind as well. While she allowed the young mother and the alleged father to spend time together inside the home, she explained her motivations with a combination of practicality and protectiveness. She felt safer knowing where her granddaughter was than worrying about her in unsafe environments. This maternal reasoning is common in emotional family court stories and echoes themes often discussed in Truth Changes Everything podcast episodes. How older generations attempt to protect younger ones from repeating harmful patterns. Judge Lake has seen hundreds of cases involving teenagers and older partners, and she calls attention to the imbalance again. She emphasizes that adults hold the greater responsibility in these situations, especially when the younger party lacks emotional maturity or independence. The alleged father shifts uncomfortably, momentarily confronted by the moral implications of his actions. The mother's grandmother sits with her hands clasped tightly, her eyes fixed on the judge. She has lived through enough hardship to recognize the gravity of this outcome. She is ready to step up no matter the result, but she hopes the biological father will contribute to parenting, to emotional support, and to stability. The mother, though, looks torn between hope and fear. If the alleged father is confirmed as the father, she believes it will validate everything she has endured, raising the child alone, dealing with accusations, and navigating emotional abandonment. But she also fears further conflict with the fiancé, who has shown open hostility throughout the hearing. The fiancé's presence has created emotional tension, reminiscent of contentious custody disputes, often explored in Supreme Court child support cases, where romantic entanglements complicate the legal process. The alleged father's fiancée appears visibly nervous as Judge Lake lifts the sealed envelope. She has stood firmly behind her partner, insisting that the child cannot be his. She has repeated the claim that the mother had multiple partners. She believes protecting her relationship means defending her partner's innocence. But she also understands that DNA results are indisputable. Her expression shifts, part defiance, part apprehension. Judge Lake slowly opens the envelope. The emotional weight in the room intensifies. Every argument, every tear, every moment of raised voices funnels toward this singular truth. This is the type of moment where people realize why truth changes everything, no matter what they believed before. But before reading the results, Judge Lake does something distinctive. She briefly acknowledges how emotionally damaging uncertainty can be. She explains that many families in her courtroom arrive broken not just by conflict, but by the weight of not knowing. For some, the DNA test becomes a moment of closure. For others, it becomes the beginning of accountability. She then reads the first line pertaining to the ex-boyfriend. This clarification is necessary because his involvement was suggested earlier in testimony. His result reveals that he is not the father. The mother exhales, relieved that one source of doubt has been eliminated. The alleged father's shoulders tight. His fiancée shoots a tense glance in his direction. Without this man as a potential biological father, the case narrows sharply. Judge Lake then reads the second result, this time addressing the alleged father directly. The tension in the courtroom crystallizes into stillness. The alleged father holds his breath unconsciously. His fiancée clutches her hands together. The mother braces herself. Her grandmother looks straight ahead, unwavering. When Judge Lake announces that the alleged father is indeed the biological father, the result lands like a heavy stone in the room. The young mother's eyes fill with emotion, relief mixed with exhaustion, validation mixed with fear about what comes next. She had insisted from the beginning that he was the father, and DNA has now confirmed her unwavering claim. The alleged father's face shifts instantly. Shock overtakes his denial. The result hits him harder than he anticipated, despite the possibility always lingering in the background. His fiancée stiffens, visibly stung by the truth contradicting everything she believed. The moment has the kind of emotional impact usually seen in adoption stories' full episodes, where families confronting truth must now accept new realities. Judge Lake gives the alleged father a moment to process the news. She watches him carefully, understanding the psychological weight that newly confirmed paternity carries. Some men in her courtroom become overwhelmed with guilt, others feel trapped, still others feel shame for having denied a child that is biologically theirs. His reaction falls somewhere between frustration and resignation. He mutters something under his breath, but Judge Lake immediately instructs him to remain respectful. After allowing a short pause, Judge Lake moves the courtroom toward the next step, responsibility. She gives the alleged father an opportunity to speak, and he expresses his wish to see his child. He admits he has never held the baby, never spent time with him, never even learned the child's full name. For a brief moment, his voice softens, hinting at a mixture of remorse and determination to do better. This moment aligns with the core purpose of paternity courts, providing children with clarity and parents with accountability. It also reflects the deeply human themes often discussed in legal ethics discussions about the concept of justice in jurisprudence. That justice is not merely about assigning blame, but about guiding individuals toward correct action moving forward. The young mother, despite months of emotional turmoil, agrees to allow him to be part of the baby's life. Her grandmother nods gently. The fiancé remains quiet, clearly processing the shock. Judge Lake ends this portion of the hearing by reminding both sides that the child's well-being must now come first. She outlines next steps related to co-parenting responsibilities and emotional healing. Though the courtroom still carries tension, there is now a path forward, one grounded in truth rather than suspicion. After delivering the DNA results and confirming paternity, Judge Lauren Lake guides the courtroom into the next stage, a stage where truth has already revealed itself, and now everyone must face what that truth demands. This is where the emotional impact of a DNA test people regret taking becomes visible. Some regret the test because it confirms responsibility. Others regret the test because it exposes lies. But Judge Lake consistently emphasizes that truth is the only foundation strong enough to support a child's future. The alleged father sits silently for several moments, processing the weight of the results. The tension that has followed him throughout the hearing recedes slightly, replaced by a reluctant acknowledgement of reality. He may not have wanted this outcome, but the evidence is undeniable. His initial denial, the accusations he made against the mother, and the emotional turmoil he caused his fiancée now stand in sharp contrast to the truth. The courtroom environment has changed, no longer fueled by speculation, but anchored in fact. On the other side of the aisle, the young mother appears both relieved and exhausted. For her, this moment represents more than proof, it represents justice. Throughout the case, she remained committed to telling her truth, even when others tried to discredit her. Her grandmother, who has supported her through every challenge, watches with quiet strength. Their perseverance through months of uncertainty reflects a kind of endurance often described in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where people share how they held onto faith or hope through painful circumstances. Judge Lake turns her attention to the baby, though the child is not physically present. She consistently reminds the courtroom that the primary purpose of these hearings is the child's well-being. She stresses that the baby, being only 1 month old, has no awareness of the conflict but will eventually grow up in the shadow of today's decisions. This emphasis on the child's long-term welfare reflects the broader relationship between law and justice, where decisions are not made simply to resolve arguments, but to promote fairness and stability for the next generation. The fiancée rests her head in her hands for a moment, overwhelmed by the truth contradicting her certainty. She entered the courtroom believing wholeheartedly in the alleged father's innocence. She defended him fiercely, even confrontationally, but truth has shifted the ground beneath her. Her reaction mirrors the emotional unraveling occasionally discussed on the Divorce Course podcast, where personal narratives collapse when evidence proves otherwise. Still, her frustration is not directed at the child. Rather, it is directed at the discrepancy between what she believed and what the DNA evidence revealed. Judge Lake doesn't chastise the fiancé, but she does address the importance of accepting truth with maturity. She explains that sometimes people cling to denial not because the truth is unclear, but because the truth threatens their sense of security, trust, or control. In this case, the fiancé must now reassess her relationship in the context of this new reality. The presence of a child outside their engagement changes the emotional landscape, and she must decide how to move forward. Meanwhile, the alleged father speaks again, expressing his desire to meet and hold his son. This is the first moment of genuine vulnerability from him. His earlier hostility dissolves into a quiet admission. He simply wants to see his child. The contrast between his prior defensive posture and this moment of openness demonstrates how truth can strip away denial, revealing the